Per the usual, it is Craig and I, and we will see if anyone joins. And I'm really happy to report that, wow, finally going to be able to finish up chapter 1, which means that my little card for this episode will be, this is the first episode that gets a chapter 2 card. So I'm pretty excited about that. Okay, so yeah, let me get this all set up here so that I can see if anybody comes in, etc., while I am talking. And yeah, away we do go. So Sister Dhammadina, and I don't know if I'm saying that perfectly right, so my apologies if I got that wrong. I was hoping to get to Sister Dhammadina last week. Yeah, so Buddhism, like many, the religions slash philosophies of yore, the fabricated mind is a fabricated mind. We only know what we know when we know it. So the relationship with all of that and their relationship with women, is interesting and riddled with not my favorite stuff. One of the many things that I like about Buddhism, not in any way to pit, one philosophy against another, as that even though, Gautama was, to my view, also trapped in the fabricated mind. As talked about in other episodes, he didn't seem to ever speak about the notion of not keeping humans as slaves, right? So again, we're only as awake as we're awake, so to my view, that's, couldn't see the folly in that. Couldn't see the folly in keeping women from practice. Maybe only able to see kind of obtuse aspects of the feminine rather than, or I should say, but to my mind, Buddhism is an example of certainly a very old, depending on who you ask, I would say it's split off from Hinduism largely because one of the many reasons was, it is not a religion. It does not acknowledge, it does not look to a being, and a larger entity. Talks about human action, right? The path, following the path. But it's really old, right? Buddhism is really, really old. Not as old as Judaism, right? But certainly older than Christianity, older than Stoicism even. And there was a recognition that women too could become awake, could become enlightened. And as someone who is a woman, I think that says a lot about how awake the path actually is. Buddhists were early adopters of kind of recognizing that there's more going on there. There's more going on there than our fabricated ideas of cultural conditioning, It was able to look through that really, really early on. It's another reason why I really appreciate traditional Buddhism, why I've chosen to adopt it. One of the many dings that it gets for me in terms of what do I want to apply my life to? What do I want to use as a map? There's that map word again. To give my life meaning and purpose and intention. So Sister Dhammadina, no, There is the case where a monk quite secluded from, let me see here. I'm gonna back up the truck here. Here we go. Passion obsession is to be abandoned with regard to pleasant feeling. Resistance obsession is to be abandoned with regard to painful feeling. Ignorance obsession is to be abandoned with regard to neither pleasant nor painful feeling. Visakha, is passion obsession to be abandoned with regards to all pleasant feeling? Is resistance obsession to be abandoned with regard to all painful feeling? Is ignorance obsession to be abandoned with regard to all neither pleasant nor painful feeling? Sister Dhammadina, no. There is the case where a monk, quite secluded from sensuality, secluded from unskillful dhammas, enters and remains in the first jhana, rapture and pleasure, born of seclusion, accompanied by directed thought and evaluation. With that, he abandons passion. No passion obsession gets obsessed there. There is the case where a monk considers, oh, when will I enter and remain in the dimension that those who are noble now enter and remain in? And as he thus nurses this yearning for the unexcelled liberations, there arises within him sorrow based on that yearning. With that, he abandons resistance. No resistance obsession gets obsessed there. There is the case where a monk, with the abandoning of pleasure and pain, as with the earlier disappearance of elation and distress, enters and remains in the fourth jhana, purity and equanimity and mindfulness, neither pleasure nor pain. With that, he abandons ignorance. No ignorance obsession gets obsessed there. So just going to kind of look that over again here. Well, I'll start by speaking to the first example related to the first jhana, and be sure to drop a link in this channel, in case anybody decides to join, and the Meditation Mind server, Discord server, to the first jhana, and what is it, and how was it apparently taught? Again, remembering that Buddhism's, Gautama came up on Hinduism, right? So, which is obviously much older than Buddhism. And so, going back and looking at Hinduism is probably a great place to start in looking at the first jhana. And I'll be sure to include, links to both Hindi and, Buddhist tradition on the first jhana front. So she says, it is possible, that if you seclude yourself and you really, meditate, that you can experience the first jhana. And so again, here's where my ignorance comes in. The first jhana, rapture and pleasure born of seclusion. So rapture, that word rapture. Again, I have experienced the raptured state in long retreats. If it's what I'm thinking that he means, I again, this is where I feel like I might be a little bit out of my depth. It feels very nuanced here. This idea of abandoning passion. And, earlier in the book, I think in the introduction, Bhikkhu's talking about, it might be the beginning of chapter 1, how Gautama talks about that idea of feeding. What are we feeding? What are we feeding our mind, basically? Garbage in, garbage out. But, if you can get away, seclude yourself away from sensory pleasure, one of the 5 aggregates, and seclude and unskillful dhammas, right? Which, those sensory pleasures can kind of titillate, right, our passions, and then we might be more likely to behave unskillfully. Well, there is a lot of pleasure that comes from that. I remember when I and again, I'll check the chat every once in a while just to make sure. Yeah, please feel free to, if you want to read or whatever, just let me know. Okay, in the chat, I'm trying to keep it open so I can see if you're saying anything. But I'm just thinking about, as I'm reading this passage, about I remember the first time I went to a retreat like this. It was that one that's become, pretty famous now, actually, at least in the U.S. It's become quite famous. It's the Goenka retreat, the 10-day Vipassana retreat that's made free, totally accessible, but it's not for the faint of heart. It's pretty tough stuff. And but I had this first jhana experience here that Sister Dhammadina, and I'm sorry if I said that wrong, is describing here. And when I got back home from the retreat, and those of you who know me on here know I talk about how I live with an eating disorder for a long time, and I had a lot of relief from that when I had gone to this retreat. And what's so interesting to me as I look back in hindsight at this now, and I'm thinking about this passage, when I got home, I immediately reverted back to bulimic behavior, even though I'd been, I guess, not behaving in that, engaging in that behavior for a very long time. And I'm thinking about it now as I read this, and I'm thinking, well, this is what was going on this really subtle level that I think I knew at the time, but didn't want to know. I wanted that feeling back. I wanted that first jhana experience back. And now I was going home. I was going back to the sensual pleasures that I had just been secluded from for the past 11 days. And there was something in me that was furious about that. Just furious. And as I read this, I'm thinking, wow, I bet you that's why I started engaging in that behavior again. I didn't know what else to do with the energy. I didn't know what to do with my fury at not being able to sustain the rapture of pleasure born of seclusion accompanied, right? So there's that going on. Oh, lost our guest. That's okay. Well, in that case, I think I'm gonna move on because time's going by here. There are 4 devotions to pleasure, kunda, that are base, vulgar, common, ignoble, unprofitable, that do not lead to disenchantment, dispassion, cessation, calming, direct knowledge, self-awakening, or unbinding. Which 4? There is the case where a certain fool finds pleasure and rapture for himself in killing living beings. There is the case where a certain person finds pleasure and rapture for himself in taking what is not given. There is the case where a certain person finds pleasure and rapture for himself in telling lies. There is the case where a certain person goes about endowed and provided with the 5 strings of sensuality. These are the 4 devotions to pleasure, kunda, that are base, vulgar, common, ignoble, unprofitable, that do not lead to disenchantment, dispassion, cessation, calming, direct knowledge, self-awakening, or unbinding. Now, it's possible that wanderers of other sects might say that Sakyan-san, sorry if I destroyed that, forgive me, contemplatives live devoted to these 4 devotions to pleasure. They are to be told not so. They would not be speaking rightly of you. They would be slandering you with what is unfactual and untrue. There are 4 devotions to pleasure, kunda, that lead exclusively to disenchantment, dispassion, cessation, calming, direct knowledge, self-awakening, and unbinding. Which 4? There is the case where a monk, quite secluded from sensuality, secluded from unskillful dhammas, enters and remains in the first jhana, rapture and pleasure, born of seclusion, accompanied by direct thought and evaluation. Further, kunda, with the stilling of directed thoughts and evaluations, the monk enters and remains in the second jhana, rapture and pleasure born of concentration, unification of awareness, free from directed thought and evaluation, internal assurance. Wow, so I'm looking at this, and again, this is where I just need a much better understanding, from Not a Hindu teacher, a Buddhist teacher, because again, there's some major departures between those two that really matter to my view right here. Because to my understanding, you're actually you're seeking to attain these higher jhana states. Not, and this is not a judgment in my view, not at all. I'm just trying to kind of sort out for myself. I know that Buddha came up in Hinduism, and so that means that he was culturally influenced by, this idea of curating them, but also this idea that that you had to be that it was a caste system, so you had to be of certain birth rank to have access to any of these states. So Buddhism disagrees with that, right? That's where probably where the biggest departure is that there is, he never talked about Brahman or Atman. He never talked. There was no, right. It's a very secular kind of human action-oriented path, the Eightfold Path. So again, this is where my ignorance is. I don't know if the second jhana. This word rapture is really throwing me off here. Rapture, and I think it's because, to my understanding, and this is where I can't wait to get a teacher. To my understanding, rapture is really not what we're trying to do in Buddhism. And like I said, I've had experiences of rapture. I've had that, and in Kundalini yoga too. There's some pretty crazy. I don't know if these are crazy, but there's some pretty interesting things that can happen. I don't know if that's the operationalized term of what rapture means. But this idea that what I'm getting at from this is that, she's describing, these relationships to the jhanas, which me as a Westerner and not having a proper teacher for a very long time, these are states that I'm familiar with. And again, if they're not some big, profound experience that I don't understand, if it's just more like what you get out of Vipassana, this kind of being below the thought stream, sort of just resting in I don't know, just a state of presence or what, I can't really find the words for that. Then yeah, that I think you can absolutely, cultivate with a daily practice. Internal assurance, pleasure born of concentration and unification of awareness, free from directed thought and evaluation. Internal assurance. When you can make contact with that stuff, it really does. To my mind, you don't have to contact it much. Further, Kunda, with the fading of rapture, the monk remains equanimous, mindful, and alert, and senses pleasure with the body. He enters and remains in the third jhana, of which the Noble One declares equanimous and mindful. He has a pleasant abiding. Further, Kunda, with the abandoning of pleasure and pain, as with the earlier disappearance of elation and distress, the monk enters and remains in the fourth jhana, purity of equanimity and mindfulness, neither pleasure nor pain. These are the four devotions to pleasure that lead exclusively to disenchantment, dispassion, cessation, calming, direct knowledge, self-awakening, and unbinding. And so then, of course, the idea being that, and then one does not become attached to any of these jhanas, right? One does not become attached to any of these states, which is in and of itself a part of being bound, right? Clinging to results, clinging for experience, clinging to experiences, seeking, looking, striving for experience. Why? Why are you striving? What do you think it is that you're going to get that is going to change your experience of phenomena? I think is a question that Buddhism asks. Now, it's possible, Kunda, that wanderers of other sects might say, the Sakyan Sun contemplatives live devoted to these four devotions, to pleasure. They are to be told that is so. They would be speaking rightly of you. They would not be slandering you with what is unfactual and untrue. It's possible that wanderers of other sects might say, living devoted to these four devotions, to pleasure, friends, what fruits, what rewards can be expected? The wanderers of other sects saying that are to be told, living devoted to these four devotions, to pleasure, friends, four fruits, four rewards can be expected. Which four? Friends, there is the case where a monk, with the wasting away of the first three fetters, is a stream enterer, certain never again, destined for the lower realms, headed for self-awakening. This is the first fruit, the first reward. Further, friends, the monk with the wasting away of the first three fetters, the attenuation of passion, aversion, and delusion, is a once returner, who, on returning only once more to this world, will make an ending to stress. This is the second fruit, the second reward. Further, the monk, with the wasting away of the five lower fetters, is due to arise spontaneously in the pure abodes, there to totally unbind, destined never again to return from that world. This is the third fruit, the third reward. Further, the monk, with the ending of effluence, enters and remains in the effluent, free awareness release and discernment release, having directly known and realized it for himself, right in the here and now, living devoted to these four devotions, to pleasure, friends, these four fruits, these four rewards can be expected. So hopefully I did right by this. That this is really a passage that talks about, that once the practitioner has experienced these jhanas, these states, right, absolutely is possible, or at least I can only speak for myself. I can't speak for anybody else, but I find if you put in the time and the effort, and if there's a certain amount of like radical willingness to sit through the own fire of your mind, that you can have experiences, that are glimpses of this from a pure rapture state. Like again, the whole rapture idea, is like, okay, not that you want to reject that, right? But be careful, about seeking out pleasure in the five aggregates, and seeking out pleasure, clinging. It's the mind, it's the ego that clings. It's the ego that clings. I think is what Siddhartha warns, or Gautama. Yeah. And Sutta 25. And which is painful practice with quick intuition? There is the case where a monk remains focused on unattractiveness with regard to the body, percipient of loathsomeness in food, percipient of distaste for every world, and focused on inconstancy with regard to all fabrications. The perception of death is well established within him. He dwells in dependence on these five strengths of one in training: strength of conviction, strength of a sense of shame, strength of a sense of compunction, strength of persistence, and strength of discernment. And these five faculties of his, the faculty of conviction, the faculty of persistence, the faculty of mindfulness, the faculty of concentration, the faculty of discernment, appear intensely. Because of their intensity, he attains quickly the immediacy that leads to the ending of the effluence. This is called painful practice with quick intuition. Wow, I love this. I know this is common in certain sects of Buddhism. It's actually a really important part of my practice as well. I was first introduced to Buddhism through Tibetan Buddhism, and this idea of meditating on your own death, or really, meditating on how disgusting the body can be. We fart, we poop, stuff comes out of our nose. right? Our skin withers. When we die, our body decomposes, it rots. Nobody wants to talk about these things, right? These inevitable truths about a human life. But in Buddhism, it's really important, because as is stated here, we're in training. You're in training. You're in training for the inevitable. You're in training for the loss of your youth and how that Shempa will play out in your fabricated mind, possibly creating a lot of suffering as you watch your skin wrinkle and sag and grow old. So here, this idea that really leaning into this, cultivating through practice a sense of shame and a healthy sense of shame can be very, very helpful. I think, to my view, when I think about my relationship to shame, it's a little bit of a charged word for me. Remember, people don't trigger me. I am triggered. So, to my mind, when I use the word shame, it's more like a radical sense of humility, right? I was born into this human form, which to my view is miraculous. I could have come in as a slug or a bat. Not to say there's anything wrong with being a slug or bat. Sorry, guys. So in Buddhism, you'll hear things like, this precious life. Well, it's precious because we're human. Could have gone another way entirely, But, Buddhists will spend some time thinking about these things, cultivating a really healthy sense of insignificance. There's so much more out there. It's so much bigger than just us. And all of that's just fabricated in our mind anyway. None of us see reality exactly the same way, right? Going back and looking at the introduction earlier in chapter 1. So in doing this, right, because of this intensity, right, they're quickly, they can make some strides. The painful practice. Yeah. And which is pleasant practice with quick intuition. There is the case where a monk, quite secluded from sensuality, secluded from unskillful dhammas, enters and remains in the first jhana, the second jhana, the third jhana, the fourth jhana, purity of equanimity and mindfulness, neither pleasure nor pain. He dwells in dependence on these 5 strengths of one in training: strength of conviction, strength of a sense of shame, strength of a sense of compunction, strength of persistence, and strength of discernment. And these 5 faculties of his, the faculty of conviction, the faculty of persistence, the faculty of mindfulness, the faculty of concentration, the faculty of discernment, appear intensely. Because of their intensity, he attains quickly the immediacy that leads to the ending of the effluence. This is called pleasant practice with quick intuition. Yeah. So really enjoyed those suttas, which really, really challenged me. And if anybody actually listens to this podcast, I'm terribly sorry if I got any of this wrong. And I encourage you to get onto the Meditation Mind Discord server and, get involved in this channel. And I would love to talk to you about it, especially if you grew up in this culture and maybe have training in the Pāli Canon. Maybe have much more experience in the language than I do. You're always most welcome, but I really enjoyed this. And I'm just going to spend the next little bit of time here getting into chapter 2. Oh yeah, the arising of the path. In the phrase Noble Eightfold Path, the Pāli word translated as Atangika, I hope I said that right, literally means 8-factored, 8-part, or 8-limbed. The 8 factors, parts, or limbs of the path are these: right view, right resolve, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, and right concentration. As we noted in the previous chapter, these factors all assist one another in becoming right to the point of forming a noble path. In other words, none of them are fully noble and right until there. All are. But to reach that point, they have to help one another, even when not fully right, to approach greater rightness until they all fall into place. This is such a powerful sentiment here about Buddhism. This idea that to alienate or shame anyone, if anybody ever listens to this, but it's more of really coming from a place of compassion, I think a legitimate question to ask. You know, when people say, take what you like and leave the rest, I think it's a compassionate question to say, and why are you leaving it? The parts that you don't like. There's a radicalness to the Eightfold Path in the notion that in following it, you're following all of it, even the parts that aren't always convenient. I recently quit a job, and you know, right now I'm pretty broke and have a lot of student debt. But I had to leave that job because it wasn't right livelihood for me anymore. And even though I recognize that Gautama was very specific and also very timely, you know, very kind of era specific, you know, about right livelihood, you know, like, you know, don't deal in arms, you know, don't deal in human trade. I think, you know, for me, at least in my practice, I think it becomes more nuanced because it is shaped by my meditation practice. Like when I no longer feel that I can follow the Eightfold Path, or that I'm being, you know, that I might be penalized for following the Eightfold Path, or if I come to believe that what I'm doing is causing harm, and that I'm now part of an organization that causes harm. It's not a judgment against the organization. You know, it's not like I'm going, oh yeah, screw you guys, yeah. It's nothing like that. It's a recognition that it doesn't align anymore. It just doesn't align, you know, so yeah, I could have left the rest, right? I could have, and I'm not saying that there's anything wrong. Please understand me. I'm in a really lucky position. I have a partner who's providing for the both of us right now while I finish my education so that I can gain new skills to get into a new job that does align with my, you know, my very committed, really, practice. So this is not a judgment. You know, only we can decide for, you know, we have to kind of decide for our own and relate with ourselves in meditation, right? And in this work. So that's kind of how I take this. It's for this reason that when the Buddha speaks of the arising of the Noble Eightfold Path, he does so in two senses. In the ultimate sense, he is referring to the stage in the practice when all 8 factors are fully right, leading immediately to the first noble attainment, a level of awakening called stream entry, because the mind is now ensured that it will inevitably reach full awakening, just as the water in a stream leading to the ocean will eventually arrive at the ocean. In a preliminary sense, though, the Buddha also speaks of the arising of the Noble Eightfold Path to refer to the very beginning stage in the practice. As you consciously start to develop the factors, this is the sense of the word that will be discussed in this chapter. And thank goodness for that, you know, because, again, because I don't come, you know, the suttas that I read earlier, you know, there is a huge cultural break there for me where, what do you mean by rapture, right? Like some of these ideas. But this I can identify with, okay? This idea that because I feel like, you know, I don't know about the some of the supernatural elements of this, right? Again, Buddhism is profoundly secular, and at the same time, he came from a Hindu perspective, and of course, that so that it makes sense that the karma is still central in Buddhism. And I'm not saying that there's anything wrong, with believing in karma, but this is a globalized server, right? We live in a globalized world. Not everybody believes in that. That doesn't align with with everybody's reality, the sense of fabricated reality, right? And that in and of itself a reality. So to my mind, I don't know about stream entry. I don't know I don't know if that's some supernatural. I don't know exactly what is meant there. I can say that there is a dropping away. There's just a dropping away. Yeah. I don't know if that's what this is, but yeah. If it is, great, and yeah, you can do it. Because I'm an idiot. If I can do it, anybody can do it. It just takes a lot of self-discipline, right? Help, assistance, training can be helpful in particular methods, and self-discipline. It's a lot of it, just being brave, being courageous, being willing to break a little bit. In a preliminary sense, though, the Buddha also speaks of the arising of the Noble Eightfold Path to refer to the... Oh, yeah. The texts equate the holy life taught by the Buddha with the Noble Eightfold Path and speak of it as containing neither lack nor excess. But the factors of the path don't arise in a vacuum. They require supplementary factors, both within your mind and in the way you live your life to foster their arising. And we've already talked about this, right? This idea of feeding. No, none of these factors on the path arise in a vacuum. In fact, nothing in our mind arises in a vacuum, right? It's the thoughts that arise in your mind are the tail end of a karmic line. And the beginning of that karmic line, or maybe the middle, right, depending on who you ask, is what you fed it, what you just fed your mind, right? So there's a lot, to my mind, going on here. If I'm getting this right, but I'll just keep reading. There is no single passage in the canon listing all these supplementary factors as a set, but they can be gathered from various passages where the Buddha describes what qualities he is looking for in a student, such as truthfulness and the ability to be observant, what internal quality necessarily underlies the arising of skillful actions in body, speech, and mind, i.e., heedfulness, what factors give rise to right view, the first factor of the path, i.e., the voice of another and appropriate attention, an exercise in reflection that in engendering a sense of dismay and urgency, samvega, causes the path to arise, and what factors signal the arising of the path. I want to speak to this second before the last one here, and I think I'm actually going to leave us on this note as we begin chapter 2. Right, so here, Bhikkhu is saying that we have from various sources, rather various places, from people who have interpreted and translated the Pāli Canon, what it's believed that Buddha was looking for, right, in students. And again, going back to last week's reading, right, that all you can do is show people the road to Radhaga, right? And so I would imagine that what this is speaking to is that Buddha was probably looking for students, trying to see if, deliberately looking for students that would be more likely to stay on the road to Radhaga till the end and not be easily, taken out by that small town or village along the way. And I think, and this is where I've had so many interesting conversations with people about this, and I don't have any answers, and I would argue that none of you do, so deal with that. I think that there's a common discussion, at least, once again, I grew up in the United States, and I've lived all over the United States, but most of my time has been spent in the South and mostly in the state of California, so in the West, during part of the country. And it's definitely a conversation that I've had with a lot of people in my circle throughout my life, beginning with my introduction to Buddhism. Because I'm a very creative person, so I used to sing semi-professionally and, do lots of other things. And so I traveled with, my tribe, back in the day when I hung out with tribes. I I surrounded myself with my fellow, creatives. And that was my circle, and we would get into these conversations about that not everybody can be an artist, that a true artist is someone who's suffered. That's what real art is. Real art is you've suffered, you've lost everything. And so to really experience art, to really be tapping into art, to really be channeling art, whatever you believe about art or creativity, it's coming from the shadow, right? Jung's the shadow self. Yeah, maybe. I honestly don't know. I can say that what brought me to Buddhism, and maybe to my art, I don't know. I mean, I don't know. I'm just going to speak to Buddhism because that I can speak to directly. Like I have experiential relationship with this bullet item that says, an exercise in reflection that in engendering a sense of dismay and urgency causes the path to arise. And so really here, I think that this is getting at what my friends who believe that to be an artist, you need to have gone through extreme suffering, what they're talking about. And maybe there's some truth to that, right? It sounds like Siddhartha gave tests to see how hungry people were. In other words, are you broken yet? This sense of dismay. Dismay at what? That life is suffering. The dismay that no matter how much you want, as soon as you get it, you're just going to want more. And that circle goes on forever. The more you want, the more you strive, the more you get, the more you want, the more you strive, the more you get, the more you want, the more you strive, right? The sense of dismay is this it? Is this life? Constantly, right, being buffeted about by mental constructs and desires that oftentimes stem from kind of egoic clinging. And because of its root, because of its source, you can't get there. You're not going to get to Radhaga from there. You're just, right? So I know that I definitely had a sense of dismay and urgency. I was suicidal. I was pretty dismayed, pretty urgent. And maybe that is what you need. I don't know. I'm pretty committed. I go to the mat for it. And what do I mean by that? I mean, I know that sounds very not Buddhist, but it actually is radically Buddhist. Right speech is not just about being nice. Especially if you're being nice is enabling someone. There's that saying, your helping isn't helping, right? Your helping isn't compassion. Or, who's your helping? Them or you? Right? So there's this radical honesty that needs to happen there. And which means your ego really does kind of have to break. And so, so maybe that's why he has that test for his students. Maybe that's the only way. I don't know. I'll leave you with that, if anybody listens. Thank you so much. It is time to go. I'll be back with more chapter 2 next week. And thank you so much, friends. I appreciate you, and be well. Bye.